Imagine this. A wealthy, arrogant millionaire CEO invites the janitor's little daughter for a simple game of chess, only to realize too late that she's not just any child, she's a hidden genius who will change his life forever. This is not just a game of chess. It's a battle of pride, humility, and destiny. But before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share this video with someone who loves an underdog rising against all odds, because what you're about to witness will leave you speechless. The building was still asleep when Martha Wilson arrived, her footsteps echoing through the glass atrium of Hartwell Technologies. The floor-to-ceiling windows cast faint gray reflections of the city outside, Boston's skyline still waiting for the first light of morning. She swiped her access badge, the green light blinking, and the heavy door clicked open. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of polished wood, recycled air conditioning, and wealth. It was a world she entered daily but would never belong to. Carts squeaked softly as she pushed it across the marble floors. Cleaning supplies rattled in rhythm with her steps. To anyone else, the executive floor was intimidating, but to Martha it was familiar, a second home where she remained unseen. 5 years of wiping down mahogany tables and buffing chrome handles had taught her the art of invisibility. She had become a shadow that passed through the offices before dawn, erasing yesterday's fingerprints, sweeping away the traces of long boardroom battles. By the time the suits arrived, everything was immaculate, as if no one had ever been there at. This morning, though, she was not alone. Emma sat quietly on one of the soft leather chairs near the corner, her legs dangling too short to reach the floor. A battered spiral notebook lay across her knees. With the stub of a pencil, she sketched lines and circles, geometric patterns that seemed far too precise for a 7-year-old's hand. Her dark curls fell over her face, but her small brow furrowed with the seriousness of someone solving problems far beyond her years. Almost done, sweetheart, Martha whispered, pausing to wipe her damp forehead with the back of her sleeve. Emma nodded without looking up, accustomed to these early hours, accustomed to sitting silently in the shadows of her mother's world. School was closed for teacher planning day, and childcare was a luxury Martha could never afford. This was their rhythm, Martha working, Emma waiting, both of them surviving. They moved from one office to another, Martha scrubbing away invisible dust while Emma trailed behind, quiet as a whisper. The last door opened into the corner office, the one space Martha always approached with a kind of reverence. Jonathan Hartwell's office, the Millionaire CEO's domain. The glass walls offered a sweeping view of Boston, now bathed in the first strokes of golden sunlight. Martha paused for a moment, just to admire it, before turning to her work, but Emma didn't look at the view. Her eyes were drawn to the side table near the window, where a polished wooden chess set stood mid-game. The pieces gleamed in the light, ivory against deep ebony, frozen in a quiet war. Emma drifted closer, her small fingers hovering just above the knight as if the piece itself whispered to her. She tilted her head, studying the positions with unusual intensity, her lips parting slightly as though the pieces spoke in a language she alone understood. Martha was too focused on spraying the glass to notice. She didn't see her daughter drawn to the board like a moth to flame. She didn't hear the faint intake of breath when Emma realized the queen was in danger. She didn't see the moment when everything in her daughter's world suddenly aligned. When the patterns she had been sketching in her notebook seemed to unfold in front of her, alive on the chessboard. The silence shattered with the sound of the door swinging open. The voice froze, clipped and startled. Jonathan Hartwell, tall, sharply dressed even at this early hour, stepped into the office and stopped mid-sentence. His steel-gray eyes narrowed, not at the janitor as Martha froze with her spray bottle in hand, but at the small girl standing before his chess set. Transfixed, Mr. Hartwell. Martha's words tumbled out, panic surging in her chest. "So sorry, my daughter's school's closed today." She didn't touch anything, I promise. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She'd managed for years to keep Emma invisible, like herself, hidden in the quiet margins of wealth. And here, in the one place she couldn't afford mistakes, her daughter stood inches from the CEO's prized possession. But Jonathan didn't look angry. His eyes, cool and calculating in boardrooms, softened with curiosity. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Does your daughter play?" Martha shook her head quickly. "No, sir. She's never Emma. Step away, please." But Emma didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the board, dark and serious, her lips forming words she couldn't keep inside. "The White Queen is in danger," she said softly. Black knight to F3 would fork the queen in rook. The room went still. Jonathan blinked, his gaze shifting from the board to the child, then back again. His jaw tightened, not with disapproval, but with something like awe. He stepped closer, studying her face as though seeing her for the first time. "You're right," he murmured. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hartwell, the millionaire who believed he had seen everything, felt the ground shift beneath him. And Martha, clutching her spray bottle, realized this ordinary morning had just cracked open into something entirely unexpected. The office door shut with a soft click, sealing the three of them inside. Martha still frozen with her rag in hand, Emma's small frame standing rigid by the chess table, and Jonathan Hartwell staring at the board as though it had just whispered a secret only the girl could hear. The silence stretched, heavy, the kind that makes the air itself feel charged. Jonathan took 2 steps closer, his leather shoes whispering against the carpet. He crouched beside the table, his eyes level with the pieces. Emma didn't flinch. She pointed again, cautious but precise, like someone explaining a fact that could not be denied. "If the knight goes here," she said, her finger hovering just above the black horse, "the queen and rook can't both escape." Jonathan leaned in, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "And you figured that out just by looking?" Emma nodded once, her curls brushing her cheeks. "It looks obvious. To her, perhaps. But to him, no. He'd been playing since he was 10, coached by his father, and trained against older competitors who drilled opening sequences into his bones. Yet this child, who had never held a chess piece in her life, had spotted a fork most new players would overlook. He felt a ripple of unease. Was it coincidence, or something else? Martha stepped forward quickly, voice firm. "Emma, I told you not to touch anything. Mr. Hartwell, But Jonathan raised his hand gently, silencing her apology. His eyes never left Emma. "No need, Mrs. Wilson," I asked. He stood slowly, folding his arms, studying the girl with a kind of quiet intensity Martha had never seen on his face. The CEO everyone feared in boardrooms, who made billion-dollar decisions with a flick of his pen, looked suddenly curious, almost vulnerable. "Do you like the game?" he asked Emma. Emma's lips parted, and for the first time she tore her gaze from the pieces to look at him directly. Her eyes were dark and steady, not the eyes of a nervous child. "I don't know it yet, but the board." She paused, searching for words. "It feels like a puzzle, a moving puzzle. I like puzzles." Jonathan's pulse quickened. He recognized something in her toned certainty without arrogance, curiosity, untainted by ego. He glanced at Martha, whose face was taut with unease, as though she feared this moment would somehow cost her everything. "She's never played before," Martha said quickly. "Not once. We don't even own a set." "Please don't." "But—" Jonathan cut her off, his voice low, deliberate. "Would you like to learn?" Emma blinked, and for a flicker of a second, the seriousness melted away. A spark lit her face raw, hungry wonder, as if he had just handed her the key to a world she'd been waiting at the gates of her whole life. "Could I?" she whispered. The sound of it tugged something deep inside Jonathan. He had grown up in a house where permission was a rare gift, where love was measured in achievements and trophies. This child's simple hope cracked something open in him that had long been sealed. Martha's hand tightened on her cleaning rag. "Sir, really, we don't want to impose. She's just a little girl." Jonathan turned to her then, his expression unreadable. But his words came slow and deliberate, weighted with something Martha couldn't quite place. "It's no imposition," he said. "I haven't been this surprised in a very long time." The moment hung there, fragile and dangerous, as if the wrong breath could shatter it. The hum of the city far below filled the silence, and through the glass walls Boston glittered in gold light. To the world outside, nothing had changed. But inside that office, destinies had just shifted like unseen pieces on a board. Jonathan Hartwell straightened, his gaze falling back on Emma, the small, serious child who had seen what even adults missed. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing with unsettling clarity. This was not a coincidence, and he had no intention of letting this discovery slip away. The following Tuesday came with a strangeness Martha couldn't shake. She had scrubbed the same hallways for years, pushing her cart past boardrooms lined with framed patents and glossy company awards. But that morning, as she and Emma stepped onto the polished executive floor, it felt different, like walking into a world that had suddenly noticed their existence. Emma clutched her mother's hand, her dark eyes darting around, scanning everything. The child was quiet, but inside her was a hum of electricity, the kind that made her restless even in stillness. Martha, meanwhile, had spent the last 3 nights wrestling with herself. What was she doing? Allowing her 7-year-old to sit across from a man who could buy and sell entire companies, a man who played chess the way surgeons wielded scalpels. Yet when the door opened and Jonathan Hartwell himself greeted them, Martha couldn't deny the way Emma's face lit up. The CEO was dressed not in his usual sharp suit, but in a dark sweater and slacks. He looked less like a mogul and more like a teacher waiting for his first student. "I'm glad you both came," Jonathan said. His voice was calm, but there was a brightness in his eyes that betrayed anticipation. He gestured to the table where the chess set waited, freshly polished, pieces arranged for a new game. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Hartwell?" Martha asked, lingering by the doorway as if ready to snatch her daughter away. Jonathan's lips curved. "Absolutely. And please call Emmy John." Martha's hesitation showed in her tightened shoulders, but Emma slipped free of her grip and approached the board like it was something sacred. She stood before it silently, her small frame reflected in the polished wood of the table. Jonathan knelt beside her. "Let's start with the basics. This," he said, lifting the rook carefully, "moves in straight lines forward, backward, side to side." Emma leaned closer, eyes narrowing, like a tower guarding the walls. Jonathan blinked. "Yes," he said slowly, "exactly like that." Piece by piece, he explained their movements. The bishop slicing diagonally, the queen raining in every direction, the pawn small but powerful when used correctly. Emma listened without fidgeting, her mind latching onto each rule, her imagination painting metaphors for every piece. Knights were horses leaping in L shapes to surprise their enemies. Pawns were little soldiers marching bravely into danger. "Now, the goal," Jonathan said, "is to trap the king so he can't move anywhere without being captured. That's called checkmate." Emma nodded, absorbing it instantly. "So the king is weak but important." "Yes." Jonathan's voice softened, almost proud. "The most important piece." They began to play. Jonathan moved carefully, explaining each step. But to his growing astonishment, Emma didn't just mimic, she asked questions no beginner ever asked. "Why do you move your pawn like that? Doesn't it leave the other side weaker?" Jonathan's head tilted. "Where did you learn about weak squares?" Emma frowned, as if the answer was obvious. "I didn't, but if you step here, then here," her small finger traced invisible paths, "your other piece can't protect." Jonathan's chest tightened. She wasn't memorizing, she was seeing. Seeing in a way that came only after years of practice. By the third game, Emma had begun to anticipate him. Her little hands reached confidently for pieces, her brows furrowed. With concentration. Martha, watching from the doorway, was stunned into silence. Her daughter's serious face. The weeks that followed reshaped the rhythm of Martha Wilson's life. For years, mornings had been predictable. Wake Emma before dawn, ride the bus half asleep, scrub, polish, erase the traces of lives far removed from her own. But now, twice a week, there was a shift in hour carved out of Jonathan Hartwell's empire, reserved not for executives or investors, but for a janitor's daughter who had somehow stepped into his world through a chessboard. Jonathan had always seen chess as a weapon, a discipline drilled into him by a father who measured affection in victories and achievements. But watching Emma play, he discovered something alien. She wasn't chasing trophies or protecting pride. She played with joy, with hunger, with a kind of innocence that somehow sharpened into brilliance when her fingers touched the pieces. One evening, as rain streaked the glass walls of his corner office, Jonathan set up the board again. Martha lingered near the door, arms crossed, her expression torn between suspicion and awe. Emma climbed into the chair across from him, her curls damp from the drizzle outside, her small hands folding politely on the table. "Do you remember the night's move?" Jonathan asked, testing her. Emma nodded, her eyes sparkling. She picked up the black knight and pranced it across the board, making a little horse sound under her breath. "It goes like this: 2 steps one way, 1 step to the side." Jonathan really laughed, the sound startling Martha. He realized he hadn't made that sound in years. "Exactly. That's how my grandfather taught me. He used to make the horse gallop across the board." Emma giggled, then placed the knight back with deliberate care. The game began. Jonathan opened with a familiar sequence, a safe play he used to test beginners. But Emma's brow furrowed, and within minutes she countered with a move that forced him back. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was instinct. Martha noticed the way Jonathan's laughter faded into silence. He leaned forward, his hand hovering above the board, as if reconsidering a move he'd made 1,000 times before. Emma sat straighter, her small frame radiating confidence. "You've been practicing," Jonathan said finally. Emma's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I make the pieces out of paper at home. Mom lets me use the old cereal boxes." Martha flushed, embarrassed. "She insisted," she murmured. Jonathan's eyes flicked to Martha's, softening. "That's dedication," he said gently. Not every child would choose puzzles over cartoons. But what startled him most was the way Emma's serious demeanor would suddenly crack open with childlike delight. She would clap her hands when she spotted a clever tactic, or giggle when Jonathan fell into a trap she had set. And then, just as quickly, her face would harden again into focus, like a miniature general planning a war. By their third week, she was no longer simply absorbing, she was creating. She laid out traps, sacrificed pawns with eerie confidence, forced Jonathan to defend in ways he hadn't had to in years. And then it happened. It was near the end of their game. Jonathan certain he had her cornered. He leaned back, smug, waiting for her to falter. Emma studied the board for a long time, her chin propped on her small hand. Then she reached out, lifted her knight, and dropped it onto the square. "Knight to F7, she announced with quiet triumph. Jonathan froze. His gaze shot to the board. His queen pinned, his king exposed. He scanned every possible move, but there was none. He looked up sharply. "That's..." His voice caught in his throat. "That's checkmate." Emma's eyes widened. "Is that good?" For a moment, Jonathan said nothing. He simply stared at the 7-year-old who had just defeated him cleanly, without even realizing the depth of what she had done. His chest tightened with something he hadn't felt since childhood: wonder. mixed with unease. Martha, standing by the doorway, frowned. She won? Jonathan met her gaze. His voice was almost a whisper. Mrs. Wilson, has Emma ever had any instruction in chess before? Martha shook her head firmly. No, sir. We don't own a set. I've never even played myself. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. In 20 years of chess, he had never seen raw intuition like this. This wasn't practice. This wasn't mimicry. It was something rarer, something dangerous. Something that could change lives. He rose slowly, straightening his sleeves, and glanced at the skyline outside. A storm rumbled faintly in the distance, lightning flashing across the city. Some children were bright. Some were gifted. But once in a generation, Jonathan realized, a child appeared who could bend the rules of the game itself. Emma Wilson was one of them. And in that moment, Jonathan Hartwell made a silent vow. He would not let this gift vanish into obscurity. The janitor's daughter had checkmated the millionaire. And the game for all of them had only just begun. The storm outside had cleared by the time Jonathan made his decision. For 3 nights, he had replayed that final move in his mind, the way Emma had placed her knight with calm certainty. He hadn't been able to sleep, not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the board, the trap, the checkmate, and her small, serious face looking up at him with innocent triumph. He couldn't trust his instincts alone. He needed someone else to see what he had seen, someone who would not be blinded by sentiment or by the wonder of watching a child do the impossible. That was why he called Robert Winters. Robert had once been a force in the chess world, a grandmaster whose name carried weight in European tournaments, a mentor who had shaped young Jonathan Hartwell into a disciplined, if joyless, competitor. Now in his late 60s, Robert lived quietly in Cambridge, drinking too much coffee and scribbling commentary on old games for niche magazines. He was gruff, skeptical, and famously intolerant of exaggeration. If anyone could test the girl and strip away illusions, it was him. "You're serious about this?" Robert asked when they met at a cafe the following Friday. He leaned back, one eyebrow raised as he stirred sugar into his cup. "You're telling me a child who had never touched a chess piece in her life beat you cleanly in 3 weeks?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I know how it sounds. That's why I need you to see for yourself," Robert smirked. "You've always had a flair for drama, but fine, bring her." That evening, Jonathan waited in his office with the board set. He paced, checking his watch, restless in a way Martha had never seen before. When she arrived with Emma, he greeted them with a warmth that startled even himself. Emma skipped ahead, her curls bouncing, her eyes immediately finding the chess table. Jonathan crouched beside her. "Emma, I'd like you to meet someone. This is my old teacher, Robert Winters. He's a very strong player." Emma turned politely, offering a small, shy smile. "Hello, sir." Robert studied her in silence for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "So this is the prodigy?" "I'm not," Emma said softly, shaking her head. "I just like the puzzles." That answer made Robert pause. It was not the boast of a child coached to perform. It was quiet truth. He gestured to the chair opposite. "Him, shall we play?" The office grew so quiet, Martha could hear the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Emma slid into the chair, her feet dangling. Robert placed his pieces with methodical precision. The game began. For the first 15 minutes, Robert played with his usual detached confidence, expecting childish blunders. He moved quickly, his hands steady, his eyes already anticipating her collapse. But then Emma answered his opening with a move so precise that Robert's hand stopped mid-air. He looked at her sharply, then down at the board. "Interesting," he muttered. Minutes stretched into an hour. Emma sat forward, chin in her hands, studying each move as though memorizing invisible patterns no one else could see. Her fingers tapped the table before she moved, not with impatience but with calculation. Robert's expression changed. The amusement was gone, his eyebrows furrowed. He leaned closer, squinting at the position. "She's not memorizing lines," he whispered to Jonathan, who stood frozen by the window. "She's creating them." Emma's small hand darted forward. "Knight takes pawn." The click of the piece echoed like thunder in the room. Robert stared. He hadn't seen the trap coming. He adjusted his glasses, leaned back, and studied her with new respect. By the time they finished, Robert's notebook was filled with hurried notations, arrows, and underlines. Emma had not beaten him, but she had pushed him into corners he hadn't expected from a child her age, or from many seasoned adults. When it ended, Emma leaned back, eyes tired but glowing. "That was fun," she said simply. Robert sat down, his pen, his face unreadable. Then he looked at Jonathan, his voice low, grave, almost reverent. "In 40 years," he said slowly, "I've seen perhaps 3 children with this level of natural ability. She's not just talented, she's something else." Martha's breath caught. Her knees weakened as she gripped the back of a chair. She had feared this moment and hoped for it in equal measure. Robert turned back to Emma. "Young lady, how old are you?" 7 3/4, Emma replied precisely, holding up her fingers as if that fraction mattered. Robert nodded, almost to himself. "With the right training, with tournaments, with discipline, she could be a national player before she's 10. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his gaze flicking to Martha. She looked torn between pride and terror. He knew the storm that had just been unleashed in her heart. Later, when Robert packed away his notes and Martha prepared to leave, Jonathan lingered by the board. The pieces were still warm from Emma's touch, the battlefield still echoing with her decisions. He thought of his father's cold eyes, trophies gleaming, a life built on achievement without joy. He thought of Emma's smile, the way she called it, a moving puzzle. The light in her eyes when she found beauty in the game. As the elevator doors closed on Emma and her mother, Robert touched Jonathan's arm. His voice was stern, final. "This child doesn't just need lessons, she needs a program, a path. If you don't take responsibility, if you don't shield her from the world while pushing her forward, talent like this will be wasted." Jonathan nodded slowly, his jaw set. "I won't let her slip away." But deep inside, as the city lights reflected against the glass, he felt a chill, because he knew Robert was right. Guiding Emma's gift would change her life. And his, and once the world saw her brilliance, nothing, not Martha's fears, not his board of directors, not even his own doubts, would ever be the same again. The Bedford Community Center smelled faintly of popcorn and floor wax, the kind of scent that clung to places where families gathered on weekends. But that Saturday morning, the place had transformed into something else entirely. Long rows of folding tables stretched across the basketball court, each covered in vinyl chessboards and lined with plastic chairs. Dozens of children hunched over their games, the only sounds the soft click of pieces and the scratch of pencils recording moves. Martha had never seen anything like it. She stood awkwardly in the parents' section, clutching a styrofoam coffee cup so tightly her knuckles whitened. Around her, parents whispered in low voices, their tone casual but their eyes sharp. They wore blazers and cashmere sweaters, carried expensive tote bags stuffed with chess manuals, and spoke in a language Martha barely understood: Caro-Can, Sicilian defense, endgame technique. She felt like an imposter in her worn coat, the faint smell of disinfectant still clinging to her hands. Beside her, Jonathan and Robert stood like watchful sentinels, both focused on the board where Emma was about to begin her first official game. Emma looked impossibly small among the other competitors, her feet barely touching the floor as she sat across from a bespectacled 10-year-old boy who wore a club polo shirt embroidered with a knight emblem. He glanced at Emma with thinly veiled disdain, tapping his pencil impatiently. Jonathan leaned toward Robert. "He's opening with king's pawn," he murmured. Robert's eyes narrowed. "Let's see how she responds." Emma's small hand reached forward and moved her pawn with slow, deliberate care. She didn't rush, didn't fidget. She sat still as stone, her dark curls framing a face far too serious for a 7-year-old dot. The boy played quickly, his moves sharp, confident. He'd clearly done this 100 times. Emma took her time, tilting her head, studying the board as if the pieces whispered their secrets only to her. Then, without hesitation, she captured his queen with a knight maneuver so clean and unexpected that the boy's jaw dropped. From the sidelines, Martha heard a murmur ripple through the spectators. Where did she learn the fried liver attack? Someone whispered. Martha's chest tightened. She had no idea what that meant. All she saw was her daughter's face, calm, focused, glowing faintly with the thrill of discovery. By lunchtime, Emma had won her first 2 matches. She returned to the parents section with her score sheet, her cheeks flushed with pride. "How are you feeling?" Jonathan asked, crouching to meet her eye level. Emma's voice was steady. "Good. The puzzles are harder, but I like them." Martha forced a smile. Her heart pounded with equal parts pride and terror. She wanted to gather Emma up, take her home, protect her from this strange, hungry world. Instead, she whispered, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." The afternoon matches grew tougher. Emma's third opponent was a 12-year-old girl with a reputation. The game stretched long, the girl methodical and precise, exploiting Emma's inexperience in the endgame. Emma lost. For the first time that day, her eyes filled with tears. She stared at the board, her small shoulders trembling. Robert knelt beside her. His voice was low, steady. "Even grandmasters lose, Emma. Losing isn't the end. It's the beginning of understanding." Emma sniffled, nodded, and wiped her cheeks. By the time she returned for the final round, she carried herself differently. Not just a child playing, but a fighter returning to battle. Her last opponent was the top seed in her bracket, a boy who had won regional championships. He leaned back smugly in his chair, clearly expecting an easy win. But Emma matched him move for move, her eyes burning with determination. The game stretched to nearly 2 hours. Parents and coaches began gathering around, whispering, pointing. What? Emma executed a queen sacrifice, something even adults rarely dared. Robert inhaled sharply. She calculated that. 3 moves later, the boy's king was cornered. Checkmate. Applause erupted from the small crowd. The boy stared at the board in disbelief before grudgingly shaking her hand. Emma beamed as she accepted her silver medal, her face glowing with a pride Martha had never seen before. She ran to her mother, clutching the medal so tightly it left an imprint on her palm. "Did you see, Mom? I planned the sacrifice 5 moves ahead." Martha hugged her tightly, her eyes wet. "Yes, sweetheart, I saw." But as the tournament director approached, praising Emma's talent and hinting at state competitions, Martha's heart twisted. She had always wanted her daughter to find a place where her mind was celebrated, not hidden. Yet every step deeper into this world seemed to pull Emma further from the small, fragile reality they shared. That evening, they sat in a restaurant far nicer than any Martha could afford. Emma recounted every game in vivid detail, her silver medal gleaming under the warm light. Jonathan listened with rapt attention, his eyes alight, while Robert occasionally interjected with technical praise. Martha sat quietly, watching her daughter speak a language she herself couldn't follow, feeling both pride and fear twist inside her chest. Jonathan caught her gaze across the table, his expression unreadable but heavy with unspoken meaning. "This is just the beginning," he said softly, Martha's fork stilled halfway to her mouth. She wasn't sure whether those words thrilled her or terrified her, because beginnings always carried with them the shadow of what they might one day cost. The newspaper article was small, almost an afterthought in the weekend edition of the Boston Herald. Just a sidebar tucked into the local section. Chess prodigy emerges from unlikely background. But for Martha Wilson, holding the paper, With trembling hands, the words felt like an earthquake. 7-year-old Emma Wilson, daughter of a single mother working as a custodian, has stunned the chess community with her natural talent. Under the mentorship of technology entrepreneur Jonathan Hartwell and retired chess grandmaster Robert Winters, Emma placed second in her first tournament, displaying abilities far beyond her years. There it was, in black and white, their lives exposed to strangers. Martha read the sentence again and again, the words blurring through the haze of disbelief. Her daughter's name in the paper. The janitor's daughter. The phone call started almost immediately. Emma's school principal wanted a meeting. The Kamba local chess club offered a free membership. A private academy called to discuss scholarships. Neighbors stopped Martha in the hallway of their building, some smiling, others whispering. The word genius began to orbit around Emma's name, sticking to her like a label she had never asked for. At first, Emma seemed oblivious. She carried her silver medal everywhere, tucking it into her backpack for school, pulling it out to show neighbors. But soon she noticed the way adults leaned in to whisper when she passed, the way classmates looked at her differently. "Mom," she asked one night, brushing her teeth, "does this mean I'm famous?" Martha swallowed hard before answering. "It means people noticed your talent, sweetheart. But fame isn't the same as worth. You're still just you." Emma seemed satisfied, humming softly as she climbed into bed. But Martha's heart remained heavy. Meanwhile, Jonathan was moving faster than Martha could process. He arranged for Emma to meet with the admissions director of Westfield Academy, one of Boston's most prestigious private schools. He spoke with Robert about building a long-term training plan, complete with coaching sessions, online matches, and tournament schedules. To Jonathan, this wasn't just a discovery, it was an investment, a mission. "Westfield has resources your current school can't dream of," he told Martha over coffee one Sunday, while Emma practiced puzzles with Robert at the next table. Advanced math, science, literature. And of course, a chess program that's nationally ranked. Martha shook her head slowly. "That's not our world, Jonathan. We don't belong there." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Emma belongs wherever her mind takes her. You can't keep her small just because the world makes you feel small." The words stung. Martha looked away, tears pricking her eyes. She hated how easily he saw through her defenses, how his certainty contrasted with her constant fear. But Jonathan had his own battles brewing. At the next board meeting, whispers surfaced. Why was the CEO of Hartwell Technology spending so much company time on a janitor's daughter? Was this philanthropy or a distraction? Eleanor Blackwood, the formidable board chair, asked pointedly. Whether Jonathan's extracurricular mentorship aligned with shareholder interests, Jonathan kept his face impassive, but inside he burned. "Chess," he told them coolly, "is the purest form of strategy. Supporting a gifted child isn't a distraction. It's a reminder of why we innovate to unlock potential." The room remained unconvinced, but no one dared press him further. Not yet. Back in her small apartment, Martha wrestled with her own turmoil. Emma was thriving in ways she had never imagined. She devoured chess books, begged for practice games, and spoke with Robert in the language of pawns and bishops, as though it were her native tongue. But Martha also noticed shadows, the way Emma skipped recess to solve puzzles, the way she grew. Frustrated when classmates couldn't keep up with her, one evening, Martha found Emma at the kitchen table, tears dripping onto a worksheet. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. Emma sniffled. "The other kids say I'm weird. That all I care about is chess." Martha's chest ached. She pulled her daughter into her arms, smoothing her curls. "You're not weird. You're extraordinary. But it's okay to want friends too. It's okay to play." Emma looked up, her eyes shining. "But when I play chess, Mom, everything makes sense. The pieces, they listen to me. The world doesn't. People don't." Martha held her tighter, realizing with dread that Emma was beginning to see the divide she had tried so hard to protect her from, the chasm between genius and belonging. The tension came to a head the night Jonathan walked them home from a late session at his office. Rain slicked the streets, neon signs glowing in puddles. Emma skipped ahead, humming, her medal swinging from her backpack. Jonathan slowed his steps to match Martha's. She's ready for the state championship. He sighed. Robert thinks she could make top 10 nationally within a year. Martha's stomach tightened. She's 7, Jonathan. She should be playing hopscotch, not calculating endgames at midnight. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She doesn't want hopscotch. She wants this. And what if she changes her mind? Martha's voice cracked. What if she burns out or fails? Or what happens when she realizes she's building her future on someone else's money, someone else's belief? What if it all disappears? Jonathan stopped under a street lamp, his face shadowed but his eyes burning. Then I'll still be here, he said. Win or lose, this isn't about trophies, Martha. It's about letting her discover what she was born to do. Martha stared at him, torn between gratitude and terror, her heart pounding with emotions she didn't dare name. Ahead of them, Emma turned, her voice bright against the rain. Hurry up, Mom, Mr. Jonathan. I want to play another puzzle before bed. In that moment, Martha realized the truth she had been avoiding. Her daughter was no longer just hers. The world had noticed. The millionaire had invested. The game had begun, and somewhere in the distance, she sensed the weight of a coming storm, one that would test not only Emma's genius but the fragile bonds holding them all together. The storm Martha had felt coming finally broke. It began quietly, like most turning points in life do, not with an explosion, but with a crack, so small at first it almost seemed harmless. Jonathan had arranged another late evening session with Robert. Emma had been ecstatic, rushing into the office with her backpack bouncing, her eyes alive with anticipation. But Martha had lingered near the door longer than usual, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. She watched her daughter spread her pieces on the board with Robert, watched Jonathan's face soften with pride as Emma explained a new opening she had read about, and something inside Martha twisted. She didn't belong here. This wasn't her world. She was the woman who polished glass walls and scrubbed stains from carpets, not someone who traded strategies with grandmasters or attended meetings with millionaires. That night, as she tucked Emma into bed, the question slipped from her daughter's lips, innocent but sharp as a blade. Mom, Emma whispered, holding her chess book close. Do you think Mr. Jonathan loves me? Martha froze, her throat tightened. She forced a smile. Of course he cares about you, sweetheart. He's proud of you, but not like a coach, Emma pressed. Like family. Martha kissed her forehead quickly, cutting off the conversation. But the words echoed in her mind long after Emma had drifted to sleep. Family. The line between mentorship and something else, something dangerously personal, was blurring. 2 weeks later, Martha's unease collided with Jonathan's boardroom battles. The directors had grown restless. Eleanor Blackwood, the chairwoman with eyes like polished steel, summoned Jonathan for a private meeting. She didn't mince words. Your involvement with this janitor's child, she said coolly, is raising eyebrows. Investors question your focus. The media whispers about motives. Some say it's philanthropy. Others, charity. A distraction at best. A liability at worst. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Her name is Emma Wilson, and she is not a liability. She is one of the greatest talents this country has ever seen. Eleanor arched a brow. And since when is Hartwell Technologies in the business of grooming chess prodigies? Jonathan didn't answer. But when he left the room, his pulse thundered with anger. The board could strip resources, tie his hands, but they couldn't extinguish the conviction burning inside him. Martha, however, heard the whispers in her own world too. At school pickup, a mother leaned close, her smile tight. So your daughters. The millionaire's little project. Must be nice to have such support. Another parent smirked openly. Careful she doesn't forget where she came from. These rich types get bored easily. The words cut deep, feeding Martha's fear. What if they were right? What if all of this, the apartment Jonathan had provided, the coaching, the tournaments collapsed the moment his attention shifted? That night, after another long practice session, Martha confronted Jonathan in his office. Emma was in the corner, absorbed in her puzzle book, humming faintly. This has gone too far, Martha said, her voice low, trembling with restrained anger. Jonathan blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? The gifts, the school, the apartment, the endless training. You've woven yourself into every part of our lives, Jonathan. And my daughter, she's starting to look at you like you're more than a mentor. Her voice cracked, like you're her father. Jonathan stepped closer, his face tight with something raw. And is that so terrible? She deserves someone who believes in her without limit. She has me. Martha snapped. I may be a janitor. I may not know the Sicilian defense from a frying pan, but she has me. And I will not let her build her life on foundations that might crumble the moment your board decides. She's no longer convenient. Jonathan's chest rose and fell, his composure cracking. You think I'm doing this out of convenience? Out of charity? Martha, he stopped himself, the words trembling on his tongue. He couldn't say them. Not yet. Martha looked away, tears stinging her eyes. I can't let this continue. Not like this. Not until I know it's about Emma. And not something else. The silence was unbearable. Emma looked up from her book, sensing the tension. Mom, Mr. Jonathan, is everything okay? Martha forced a smile, her voice too bright. Everything's fine, honey. Pack up your things. We're going home. Emma's face fell. She obeyed quietly, slipping her chess pieces back into their worn box. Jonathan watched, helpless, as the little girl who had once transformed his sterile office into a place of laughter now left it silent again. That night, Martha lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of their small apartment. Emma slept beside her hand still clutching a nightpiece. Tears slid silently down Martha's face. She had ripped her daughter from the one place she had found belonging, from the one man who had seen her brilliance without hesitation. She told herself it was protection, boundaries. But deep down, Martha feared the truth. She had acted out of pride, out of fear of losing control, out of terror that Emma might love someone else as fiercely as she loved her mother. Meanwhile, in his penthouse across town, Jonathan sat in the dark, his untouched glass of scotch sweating on the table. The chessboard before him lay mid-game, the white pieces abandoned. He couldn't move. The silence pressed in on him. For the first time since Emma had entered his life, he felt the weight of her absence like a physical wound. He had built empires, closed deals worth billions, but he had never known what it was to lose something he hadn't even realized he needed, until it was gone. The janitor's daughter had walked out of his life, and with her, she had carried away the only spark of joy he'd felt in years. The weeks after Martha pulled Emma from Jonathan's mentorship unfolded like a long winter, even though spring had already touched Boston. At home, Emma still set up her cardboard chess pieces on the kitchen table, but her movements were slower, now less joyful. She would stare at the board, sigh, and push the pawns forward half-heartedly, as though the pieces had lost their voices. Sometimes she simply folded the board and left it there, untouched. Martha noticed. She noticed how Emma no longer hummed while brushing her teeth, how she no longer begged for just one more puzzle before bed. The silver medal that once never left Emma's side now lay forgotten in a drawer. The spark, the thing that had frightened Martha as much as it had thrilled her, was flickering. One evening, Martha found her daughter sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at her nightpiece. "Sweetheart," Martha said softly, kneeling beside her, "you can still play. You don't need Mr. Jonathan to enjoy chess. Emma's lips trembled. It's not the same, Mom. With him, the pieces danced. Now, they're just quiet. The words carved straight into Martha's heart. Across town, Jonathan sat in his penthouse office, the city glowing outside his glass walls. Deals were still signed, contracts negotiated, but his sharp edge dulled. He caught himself staring at empty chairs during board meetings, half expecting a small voice to chime in about knights and queens. He would return to his chessboard late at night, only to leave games unfinished. For the first time in his career, the man known for ruthless focus began making mistakes, tiny ones at first, but enough to make his board notice. And they did. At the next quarterly review, Eleanor Blackwood's gaze was sharper than ever. She set down her pen, steepling her fingers. Jonathan, your numbers are steady. Profits are strong, but your presence, it's lacking. Her voice cut like glass. You've built this company on precision, and now you drift. Jonathan bristled, but before he could respond, Eleanor leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. This isn't about business, is it? It's about her, the child. The room stiffened. Jonathan's hands clenched on the table. You have no idea what she represents, he said coldly. Oh, but I do, Eleanor replied smoothly. I've seen prodigies before, and I've seen what happens when brilliance isn't nurtured. It withers. Do you really think you're protecting her by stepping back? Or is this just fear? Jonathan froze. Fear. The word lingered. Eleanor pressed on. Listen to me, Jonathan. You think your board sees Emma as a liability? They don't. They see her as leverage. Public image, inspiration, a narrative investors can use. A genius plucked from obscurity by a visionary CEO. Don't be naive, the world already has its claws in her. Jonathan's chest tightened. He hated the truth in her words. Eleanor leaned back, her expression softening ever so slightly. If you walk away now, you don't shield her. You abandon her to people who don't care about her, only about the story she represents. If you stay, at least she has someone who sees her as more than a headline. The meeting ended, but Eleanor's words haunted him. That night, Jonathan stood at his window, watching the city lights blur, and made his decision. He would not give up on Emma, not while he still had breath in his body, but the choice wasn't his alone. 2 days later, Martha opened her apartment door to find Eleanor Blackwood herself standing in the hallway. Immaculate as ever in a tailored coat, she looked entirely out of place among the peeling paint and flickering hallway lights. Mrs. Wilson, she said smoothly, offering a hand. Might I come in? Martha, startled, hesitated before stepping aside. Eleanor's gaze swept the small apartment. Emma's schoolbook stacked on the counter, the cardboard chessboard on the table, the faint smell of cleaning supplies lingering in the air. Eleanor turned to Martha, her expression unreadable. You think you're protecting your daughter by pulling her away. You're not. You're suffocating her. Martha stiffened. Excuse me? I've watched her play, Eleanor said simply. Jonathan brought me recordings. That child is not ordinary. She's extraordinary. And extraordinary gifts don't stay hidden. If you refuse Jonathan's help, someone else will step in. Sponsors, schools, organizations that don't care about Emma, only about what she can give them. Martha's hands trembled. She's 7 years old. She's just a child. She needs to be a child. Eleanor's voice softened, but it carried iron beneath. She needs to be herself. And part of who she is, Mrs. Wilson, is a genius. If you try to bury that, you'll break her. Martha looked at the chessboard on the table, at the silent pieces waiting to be moved. She thought of Emma's dimmed eyes, her whispered confession that the pieces had stopped dancing. Tears pricked her vision. Eleanor placed a business card on the counter. You don't have to trust Jonathan. You don't have to trust me, but trust your daughter. She knows what she was born for. And if you continue to deny her, she resent you for it. When Eleanor left, Martha sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. She had fought so hard to keep Emma safe, to keep control. But what if Eleanor was right? What if her protection had already turned into suffocation? That night, as Emma slept with her nightpiece clutched to her chest, Martha sat awake by the dim glow of the lamp. Pride, fear, love, they twisted inside her until she could no longer tell them apart. And slowly, painfully, she realized the truth. She had made a mistake, not by letting Jonathan into their lives, but by shutting him out. The next morning, Martha dialed his number. Her voice shook when he answered, but her words were steady. "Jonathan," she whispered, "we need to talk. About Emma, about everything." For the first time in weeks, Jonathan felt his chest loosen, hope flaring. The break had been brutal. The reunion would not be easy. But as he looked at the empty chessboard before him, he knew the next move was finally his to make, and he would not waste it. The reunion came not with fanfare, but with hesitation. Jonathan stood in the corner of the Hartwell Foundation's new community hall, a cavernous space he had funded but never christened. Rows of simple wooden tables stretched across the polished floor, each lined with chessboards. The place was alive with sound, children laughing, chairs scraping, parents chatting. A banner overhead read, "Chess for all, unlocking potential, one move at a time." But Jonathan's eyes weren't on the banner, nor on the crowd of children from schools across Boston. They were fixed on the doorway. When Martha appeared, her daughter's hand clasped tightly in hers, Jonathan felt something twist inside his chest. Emma's curls bounced as she walked, but her face was cautious, her eyes uncertain. Martha's expression mirrored her daughter's hope colliding with guilt. Pride tangled with apology. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Emma broke free of her mother's hand and ran across the floor. "Mr. Jonathan." The sound of her voice cracked something wide open inside him. He dropped to his knees just in time to catch her in his arms. She hugged him fiercely, burying her face in his shoulder. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet but shining. "The pieces," she whispered breathlessly. "They're talking again." Jonathan's throat tightened. "They never stopped, Emma. They were just waiting for you to listen." Martha approached slowly, her steps heavy with the weight of her own pride. When she finally stood before him, she spoke in a low, unsteady voice. "I was wrong." Jonathan straightened, his gaze meeting hers. She looked exhausted, fragile, but also stronger than he had ever seen her. "I thought I was protecting her," Martha continued, "but I was protecting myself. From the fear of losing her to a world I don't understand. From the fear that she might need someone more than me." She swallowed hard. "But she does need you, not instead of me, but with me. And if you're willing, I'd like to start over." Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then Jonathan nodded, his eyes softening. "We both made mistakes. But for her sake, Martha, we can't make them again." The program began that afternoon. Children from every background, wealthy and poor, privileged and overlooked, sat together at the long tables. Emma stood at the front, clutching her battered nightpiece, her curls haloed by sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Jonathan had expected Robert to give the opening lecture. Instead, Emma raised her hand timidly. Can I say something?" The crowd chuckled softly, amused by the little girl's confidence. Robert, hiding a proud smile, waved her forward. Emma climbed onto a chair so she could see over the podium. She placed the nightpiece on the wooden surface and held it up. "When I first saw a chessboard," she began, her voice small but steady, "I thought it was just a puzzle. But then I learned every piece has a story. Pawns are brave, even though they're small. Rooks are like towers, bishops like secrets, queens like lightning. Even the king who's not strong is still worth protecting." The children leaned closer. Parents hushed. Jonathan and Martha exchanged a glance, both caught by the gravity in her tone. But the most powerful piece Emma paused, looking down at the knight in her hand. Isn't really the queen, or the rook, or even the king. It's this one, the knight. Because it moves differently. It doesn't go in straight lines. It surprises you. It shows you that the best way forward isn't always the obvious one. She set the piece down and looked at the rows of children. I used to think I didn't belong anywhere, that I was just extra. But then I realized maybe I'm like the knight. Maybe we all are. We don't have to move the way people expect. We just have to find our own path. The hall erupted in applause. Some of the parents wiped their eyes. Robert clapped the loudest, his hands trembling slightly, but it was Martha who cried openly, her tears spilling down her cheeks as she watched her daughter, a janitor's child, a prodigy, a girl who had been nearly broken by fear, stand in front of a crowd and declare her belonging. Jonathan felt his chest tighten with something that was no longer just admiration. It was love, for Emma, yes, but also for the woman standing at the back of the hall, her eyes shining with pride and humility. Later, as the children played their games and laughter filled the hall, Jonathan walked Martha out to the quiet courtyard. The air smelled of rain, the city lights glittering beyond. You know, he said softly, this foundation. It wasn't really my idea. Martha looked at him, frowning. What do you mean? Jonathan smiled faintly. It was hers. From the moment she walked into my office, from the moment she said the pieces danced, I just followed her lead. Martha laughed softly through her tears. She always was 3 moves ahead. They stood there in silence, side by side. No contract signed, no promises spoken. Just an unspoken understanding of partnership, of family, of a future neither had expected. But both had begun to want Dot inside. Emma was teaching the younger boy how to move a pawn. She leaned in close, whispering as though sharing a secret. Remember, she said, her voice filled with the wisdom of someone far older than her years. The best move isn't about power. It's about believing you belong on the board at all. The boy nodded solemnly. Emma smiled, and somewhere deep in Martha's heart, a truth finally settled. Her daughter had found her place in the world. And she, Martha, had found hers too, not by holding Emma back, but by standing beside her as she leapt forward into destiny. The janitor's daughter, the millionaire CEO, the child prodigy who saw more than moves. In chess, as in life, the quietest openings had led to the most extraordinary of champions.